What is up, YouTube? It's SpookyLoopz, and today we're going to be sorting every single map in Dead by Daylight into my personal killer main tier list. Should be buckets and buckets of fun. Let's get into it. All right, my friends, we are on tiermaker.com, and I have created a template of all 36 maps that are currently in Dead by Daylight, including the newest map, Eyrie of Crows, Eyrie of Crows, Irene. As I would say, the majority of you guys know, I am primarily a killer main, so I do play a lot of killer, just some survivor as well too. And a lot of these maps, positively or negatively affects either side, right? So I'm gonna be going in with just a killer main mindset, and we're gonna be sorting each map into 4 tiers. One being great, good, decent, and awful. And we're gonna be basing that off of map layout, how strong the structures are, where generators can be at, line of sight blockers, etc., etc. Size, because that matters. And a little disclaimer, of course, this is just my opinion. I'm just talking about what I personally enjoy playing versus what I don't enjoy playing on. So, without further ado, let's get into it. All right, my whole capture screen is a little weird. Give me a second. Okay, here we go. Let's start up. The first map is going to be Azarov's resting place. Now, Azarov's resting place is mostly killer-sided, I would say. There's a couple of downsides to the map, but there's a lot of positives. The map is kind of like in an I formation, where the whole middle section is just a long corridor of tiles, usually with 1 or 2 generators in the middle, but it is tremendously easy for survivors to 3-gen themselves on, especially if you're only patrolling one area of the map. It forces the survivors to work on the other side and then have to deal with the consequences later. Whether it may be a lame technique, it is valuable, it works, but the downside to it is if you're not applying pressure the appropriate way, you could have gens split on both sides of the map, which makes patrolling tremendously difficult to do, especially if you're playing a killer that is not high mobility, like Huntress, Deathslinger, Trickster, things of that nature. Overall, I say I have more success in this map than I don't, so I'm going to go ahead and put ARP in the good tier. Yeah, I like that spot. Okay, up next is Blood Lodge. Now, I actually prefer the older Blood Lodge. I actually prefer all of the Autohaven maps, but Blood Lodge in particular was my favorite, being a Huntress main, because everything was, the whole middle section was just filled with tiny, unsafe trash everywhere. The new map's a little bit different. The main building, which is the actual lodge itself, has a window with a breakable wall in it. If you don't break the wall, the window can be a little tedious to deal with, but it's not too bad. There's also the random bus spawns that are usually on the sides of the map. And of course, there's a shack. The basement can spawn either in the lodge or in the shack. Getting the basement in the lodge makes things pretty easy to maintain that area, especially if you're playing like Trapper or something like that. But killers like Ghostface, Michael Myers, Pig don't do, in my opinion, don't do particularly well there. I don't, because there's not really a whole lot of line of sight blockers. The middle of the map's just kind of wide and open, and everyone can see where you're coming from for the most part. But I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna put Blood Lodge in decent. I'll put Blood Lodge in decent. All right, we got Wrecker's Yard up next. Wrecker's Yard is actually a fun map. I enjoy playing this one because there's one specific static spawn, which is the shack. The shack will always spawn in the middle of the map. The basement always spawns there. There's no other main building or structure to send the basement to. Which is cool because a lot of the generators kind of just really just circle around the shack in this big square. There's also a generator in the very far back of the map that has usually like a tile near it, but the generator is just surrounded by a couple of trees, and it's a massive, massive dead zone. So if you ever catch a survivor running over there, or they've already exhausted the pallet that's in the nearby tile, it's always a guaranteed easy down, easy chase. The tiles are randomly generated, so you could have, long wall jungle gym, short wall TL walls all over the place. You got random bus spawns as well too, or the crane truck thingy that spawns there as well. But the most important thing is the size is okay, but having the shack in the middle, if survivors are working on anything near the middle section of the map, you always know you have the option of putting someone in the basement. We all know how deadly the basement can be. Overall, I think the map's fun. It's enjoyable. There's no other main prop that you have to deal with. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and put Wrecker's Yard in good. I like where that is right. Okay, we got the Wretched Shop. The Wretched Shop has a main building, which is like the silo garage looking thing. It also has the chance to spawn the basement there. There's also a shack on the opposite end of the map as well. And the main building has a window that can either spawn on the left or the right side. If it spawns on the left side, there is a breakable wall there that a killer can get rid of. Usually there is a pallet that's adjacent to that breakable wall, so survivors have a way to transfer it into that, which is not that big of a deal. The back side of the silo sometimes can spawn a hill or some other assorted tiles with generators. Usually a little bit of a dead zone. Again, once if the pallet is gone from that area, that whole place is generally pretty dangerous for survivors. Chasing survivor on the inside, there's a car that's sitting inside the garage. I think it's a car that's in the middle of the main building, and survivors only have one way to go. They can either go left or right, and it's really easy to chase there. They can catch the window, which is not a problem. I would say then when you get to the middle side, there's the random chance bus spawns as well too, variations of those big ugly car thingies, and a bunch of little trash in the front with some connecting trash tile pallets. But other than that, it's not that bad of a map. It's not too exciting, to be honest, but I think I enjoy playing on it over some others, that's for sure. I'm going to go ahead and put this on decent. Nothing really strikes me as, you know, oh my god, I have such a great advantage here. I've definitely lost my fair share of games on the Wretched Shop, but ultimately, main building-wise, pretty easy. I typically try to avoid all the bus loops. If Survivor tries to take me there, it goes for all auto haven. I just generally just leave unless I have to take the chase. But yeah, put it in decent. Okay, we have the last map in the auto haven realm, which is Gas Heaven. Gas Heaven has actually grown on me in a negative way as of late. The map has two massive sight blockers, which is these pile of cars that are all smushed on top of each other on one side of the map, and it kind of splits that section in two, and you have to go all the way around to patrol those two generators that are usually there. And then on the other side, there's the shack, and then another set of smashed cars on the opposite side, like kind of like in the other corner. And same thing, you have to go all the way around. There are two ways to get through it, but there's nothing in the middle, so you have to go all the way around the side of the cars to patrol those gens over there. The main building is the actual gas station itself. It has a bunch of breakable walls on the actual inside of the garage where the generator is, and there's a pretty safe pallet that's next to the truck that's inside there as well. So you could go ahead and you could break those doors, but survivors can easily just have, you know, a way of exiting through them. So I tend to leave those up unless I genuinely have to get in there really fast. The main door could spawn with the door closed, so you have to break it or take the window that's in the front. And where the aisles are, there's a pretty good pallet that's there with a window that's there and a breakable wall. So there's a whole bunch of breakable walls in the actual gas station. The basement could also spawn there. But my biggest downside is just having so much line of sight blockers with those stacks of cars. Map is relatively big too. So depending on where you spawn, and I've seen it with Lethal Pursuer, you could spawn and just see individual survivors just already on gens all throughout the map, and it makes patrolling and trying to manage your gens, especially if you're not running a high mobility killer, pretty difficult. I'm genuinely not a big fan of Gas Heaven. I'm going to put Gas Heaven in awful. I don't enjoy it. It's not fun. The main building can be a pain in the ass too, but it can spawn in the basement, which is kind of cool. But I don't really see anything positive going for that map. I am not a fan of Gas Heaven. Actually, you know what? I saw some of the other maps that we have coming up, and Gas Heaven's actually not that bad. Decent. Not good, though. Probably should have made another tier for below decent. Oh, let's keep going. Okay, up next is Badham Preschool. Now, in case you didn't know, Badham Preschool has 5 different variations of the map. 5. Why we need 5 variations of this map, I do not know. If any of you watch my streams, you know how exasperated I get when we go to Badham. I hate Badham Preschool. The school, the only good thing about the school is that both sides of the school are blocked by a door that I can choose to break or not. I hate the bottom section of the map. The front side of the school has a fence where a survivor can catch the fast vault. Go on the other side, there's another car with a pallet there that you have to break. You really can't mind game it. There's really no point. So you gotta just sucks all your time out of your day. Then they can go back into the middle of the school and then go back out to the front and catch the fast vault. Every variation of Badham also has a structure called The House of Pain, which is an absolute nightmare to deal with. It is a house that has 2 stairwells that go down to the bottom floor. That has a god pallet down there that you have to break. You cannot mind game that building. There's an assortment of windows for survivors depending on what spawns, where they can jump in and out of. And then you also have a shack, which of course, you know, all shacks are the same, but you have a shack there. And then you also have, I believe it's Quentin's house, that has 2 floors, bunch of windows you can jump in and out of, and also up top with usually sometimes spawning a pallet on the inside where the lockers are. It is a nightmare. I hate Badham Preschool tremendously. Awful. Awful, awful, awful. And if you like that map, good for you. I don't. Okay, moving on to the Coldwind Farm Realms. Me personally, I dislike Corn. I don't think Corn is a lot of fun for any stealth killer. I do play Ghostface a lot as well too, and Michael Myers. They don't do well in Corn. Anyways, first map up is Fractured Cowshed. I don't even know where to begin with this map. I have one for starters. The map is huge. The map is very, very big. The main building is a big old cowshed or a barn. On the inside of the barn, there's a generator that always spawns in there. Windows on either side that survivors can exit through. On one side, there is a possibility of the basement spawning next to a window with 2 breakable walls, which you can break. On the outside of the actual main building is an assortment of relatively safe pallets. On Coldwind farm maps, they have like this prop that can spawn, which is kind of like a John Deere with a hay cart and a pallet that's on the inside that is super, super strong. You can't mind game through it. There's all of those scattered around the main building. On the outside, and then the front, and then sometimes there's just one where there's just another pallet that's out there. The middle portion of the map is always corn. There is usually a harvester that'll spawn there, and harvesters are pretty easy to deal with, but I would say the best part about this map is the middle section. Everything else, there's randomly generated tiles that spawn, TL walls, long wall jungle gyms, but I think the biggest problem with Fractured Cowshed is the shack. The shack will always spawn in the opposite corner of the barn. Depending on which direction the shack spawns, there could be a window that the survivor can fast fall out of into one of those hay cart pallets that's very safe, or just big hay bales with a pallet in those. Next to that is usually another tile, usually a TL wall. On the other side of that is usually another pallet. It's just very easy for survivors to string and tie loops together all from that whole back section of the map. I hate Fractured Cowshed. Based off the most recent dev Q&A, Fractured Cowshed is the most escaped map by survivors out of all 36 maps, which is no surprise. I dislike Fractured Cowshed a whole bunch. Not gonna waste any more time going into awful. Up next in our Corn Chronicles is gonna be Torment Creek. Torment Creek has a main building that's like a wooden structure, like almost like a wooden silo. There's a generator spawn there. On the sides of the actual structure, there is a window with a breakable wall, and then on the other side, there's just an open doorway. Survivors also on both sides of the main structure have relatively strong pallets that are there with hay and a pallet on both sides. So it's very easy for survivors to catch the fast fall at the window. Without you breaking the door, you're going to fall behind through the window, and then you'll be met with a pallet there, and then also a pallet on the other side. Best approach, obviously, is to just break the door, so it makes your traversing of that area a little bit easier. Basement has a chance to spawn there. There's also a shack. There's also a cow tree spawn on that map as well. The cow tree is a structure that has a god pallet and a window the survivor can vault on the other side of this big tree. The thing with cow trees is once the pallet's gone, the loop loses all of its strength. So not really a big deal, but that usually spawns in the middle where filled with a bunch of corn, and the shack being at the opposite side of the main structure. And then you have your common spawns, your TL walls. Maps are relatively on the big side. And of course, corn vision is definitely a thing. There's a lot of sight blockers, being that it's corn, and there's a lot of high hay that's kind of blocking a lot of stuff there. Overall, the map really doesn't have what Fractured Cowshed has, which is a bunch of tiles that are so close-knit to each other that it's really easy for survivors to string along. So I'm going to put I'm going to put Torment Creek in decent. Once you get rid of the cow tree loop, and once you get rid of the window, the breakable wall next to the window, map's not too bad. Moving on to the Thompson House. Now, the old rendition of the Thompson House, I absolutely did not like. The middle building, I just had really bad luck with it. The Thompson House, not to be biased, but the Thompson House, the new version of it, I think visually it looks fantastic. I do actually like the main building now. Survivors can go up to the second floor and they can catch a fast vault, which immediately takes them right down to the very front of the house. Or there's these two big old holes in the walls where they can actually go out into the awning of the second floor and jump down, which is really easy to chase there. The basement does have a chance to spawn. Also, there's a gen that's up top on the outside balcony, and they have to go in through a window, and they can either go through the hole in the floor, which is really easy. There's a couple of vaults that they can take on the inside. There are no pallets in the actual inside of the Thompson House, which is cool. In the middle section is all corn. Usually a harvester will spawn, and then in the far other corner, there's a cow tree. Usually then there's the shack parallel to that. So, I mean, other than your typical run-of-the-mill corn props that spawn on there with some relatively decent pallets along the fence lines of the Thompson House, the map's not too bad anymore. The whole middle section of the map is corn. Massive dead zone. But yeah, I'm gonna go. It's a decent map. It's not anywhere near as bad as Fractured, but it's definitely decent. Definitely decent. Okay, in case you're wondering why I'm wearing a different shirt, I actually had to stop recording. We had some things that came up at the house, but we're gonna continue this. Obviously, I'm recording a day afterwards. Anyways, moving on to Rancid Abattoir. Rancid has a main building that consists of 2 rooms. On one side of the room is where there's a little window where the basement can spawn. In the very, very back, it gets a little congested for survivors in the event of high traffic if you hook someone in the basement, which is always a good thing. There's a little window that's in the very, very back that can be a little tedious to deal with. Survivors can catch a fast vault there, and then they have to go around a little big thing of hay. And if you're not close to them, you probably have to go through the other doorway or fall behind with the window. But it's not that big of a deal. The other room has a generator spawn in it. There's these fences that are the inside where the generator is that you have to kind of like go around it, almost as if you're in a queue at an amusement park. You can hit over the little fences, and a lot of survivors, you'd be surprised, don't know that. They get a little too close, you can hit over them, which is cool. But there is a window on the other side that they can get out of, which makes it, if you're far behind, you have to path with them through the fences to be able to get them at the window. There's a breakable door and another window on the other side. So the whole main building, I think, is comprised of 3 windows, they're not god windows or anything like that. They're pretty decent. The shack will spawn on the opposite side of the map. I think the shack is a fixed spawn over there. Of course, basement can spawn there too. In the middle section is all corn and a bunch of typical farm props and farm loops and tiles that are all scattered throughout the map. It's not that big. It's not that big of a map. The outside of the main building has some hay pallets that are there that are relatively unsafe, which is pretty cool. But yeah, the map's decent. The map's not bad. Nothing too exciting about it. So it's corn. So we're going to put that in the decent category. Okay, in the last map of the Coldwind Farm realm is going to be Rotten Fields. I have a love-hate relationship personally with Rotten Fields. On one hand, I absolutely love Rotten Fields if I'm playing Hillbilly because I'm not the greatest Hillbilly in the world, and there's not really a whole lot of stuff for me to run into, being that the entire map is a massive square. The very middle of the map is shack. That's the main prop in the middle of the corn. There's no pallets around that, really. It's a guaranteed basement spawn every single time. And anything around that area, aside from the shack in the middle, there was nothing else. On the outskirts of the map, however, there can spawn usually a cow tree, and then on the other side, there's going to be a harvester. And then typical TL walls, jungle gyms scattered on the outskirts of the map. Also, if I'm running any ore reading stuff, one of my favorite maps to go to is Rotten Fields with the Huntress if I'm running glowing concoction. Obviously, just barbecue snipes through the corn is a lot of fun as well too. But maintaining pressure on all generators on that big map can be a little difficult. And other killers that aren't high mobility or don't, like, let's say you're not running any ore reading stuff, this map can be very difficult. This map actually used to be the most escaped survivor map in the game. Looks like Fractured Cowshed has taken that one. But the map, aside from the outskirts, it's just a big, massive cornfield, and that's it. It's a massive square, and it's okay. I don't mind it. I enjoy it. I enjoy it for the most part. Definitely some killers don't do well there. Stealth killers don't do well there. Slow killers like that aren't projectile killers, don't do it particularly well. But aside from that, the props are pretty far spread out, so it's not like it's a loop on top of a loop on top of a loop that is very easy for survivors to tether together. Prop spacing is pretty good, I'd say, and being that the middle building, you get a survivor out in the corn, it's usually going to be a down. I'm going to go ahead and put Rotten Fields in decent. I think the map is decent. I do enjoy it sometimes with select killers. On the other hand, some I don't. I don't think it's a bad map. I don't think it's a bad map. But I'm pretty 50-50 on it. I enjoy it depending on who I'm playing, and sometimes I hate it depending on who I'm playing. Now, I think decent's a good spot for the last Colwyn farm map, which is Rotten Fields. Okay, moving on to a one-off map, which is actually Dead Dawg Saloon. Dead Dawg Saloon was released with the Death Slinger. I'm gonna be honest with you. Dead Dawg Saloon is my all-time favorite map. The map is perfect size. Dead Dawg Saloon is one of the smallest maps in the game. It's very, very balanced. The main building is a saloon, and the saloon has kind of a tricky window on the second floor above the bar that is really easy to deal with once you hit the breakable wall. The saloon itself has a bunch of breakable walls, which I only tend just to break the door up top on the second balcony. They had a room that was called the Death Room, where survivors could vault into it, and then there's only one window out, and that was the only way to get out of the bedroom. But they have since closed that off, so that's no longer a room to go into. But there's a guaranteed generator spawn on the balcony of the saloon outside. Across the street is a fixed shack spawn that has a breakable wall in it. It's a typical shack. Basement can either spawn there, or it can spawn on the back side of the saloon. But the entire backyard of the saloon next to the gallows is just a big open field with a couple rocks and some pallets over there. The other side of Dead Dawg Saloon has a entire wall of structures. There's a couple of buildings there that you can go up onto the stairs, and you can either survivors can catch a fast vault down, or there's a hole there that has sometimes spawns generators. In the very back corner, there is a water tower that has a pretty decent pallet, and it's very easy for survivors to transition from the water tower over to the entire wall of loops and structures that are there. But typically, the map is very balanced. It looks great. It's one of my all-time favorite Huntress maps to play on, and I think it's fun. And I think it's fun for both sides. I think survivors and killers can both equally enjoy this map and not complain about it being too overpowered for either side. So I'm going to go ahead and put our very first map in the great tier. Dead Dawg Saloon is the jam. I promise you, it's so good. Okay, moving on to the first map of the Crotus Prent Asylum realm. It's going to be the Disturbed Ward. There's a couple of things about this map that are really, really, really annoying to deal with. One, the map is very, very big. Huge map. Second thing, the map has a main building, which is the actual asylum itself. And on the inside, it's made up of 2 levels. The main building is littered with super, super strong god pallets in that building. The first floor has a god pallet by the entrance, and then also on the other side, there's 2 stairwells on opposite sides that go up to the second floor, where there's always a generator in the middle with 2 really, really strong pallets up there as well. The main building is just littered with exits for survivors to get out of. There's 2 really good windows that are there, and there's also a whole bunch of broken parts of the wall where survivors can just literally just run out of. The next thing I want to talk about with the Disturbed Ward is there's these 2 pocket alleys. So imagine like you have the center of the map, and then you have these 2 alleyways that stem out, randomly spawn loops and tiles. There's always a gen piece in the back of those pocket areas I like to talk about. And since the map is so big, if you're not paying attention to the generators you're pressuring, if your last gens are made up of having a generator in one of each pockets, it's very, very difficult to cross all of that playing field to get over there to protect those generators. As far as everything else, there's also a shack that's a guaranteed spawn on the opposite side of where the main building is. And there's a lot of pretty good structures that are, typical loops that are spawned here and there. The only good thing about this map is in the back corner, there's a generator that's next to this greenhouse area that has some park benches and stuff like that. Aside from a pallet that's in between the benches, that whole back area is pretty dangerous for survivors. That is the strongest part of the map, in my opinion, for killers to be at if you catch a survivor out there. But everything else is very, very safe. There's a lot of line of sight blockers. It's a big map to cover a lot of ground to try to patrol all the gens. Disturbed Ward, in my opinion, I absolutely do not like. I'm going to put that map in awful. I do not like it. It's very big. The main building is an absolute pain in the ass, and it's really, really hard to manage all of your gens if you're not paying particular attention to what's being worked on and what is not. All right, now let's talk about the other Curtis Print Asylum map, which is Father Cambell's Chapel. This map I actually enjoy. It's a lot smaller than the Disturbed Ward is, which is always a huge plus. The main building is a church that has a guaranteed generator spawn on the second floor and a couple of breakable walls. Depending on RNG, sometimes those windows will be, sometimes there's windows up there and sometimes there's no window. It's just a complete drop-off. If you have the drop-off, it's a lot easier to chase survivors there because if they catch a fast fall, then you got to wait and vault behind them. It's really easy for them to create distance that way. The bottom floor is all made up of broken pews and stuff like that with a couple of windows they can hop out of. Majority of the time, it's a pretty easy chase, and the main building isn't too hard to deal with, and there's no pallets on the inside of that main building. The backside of the map is a huge carnival, and there's Maurice, which is the horse that's in Dead by Daylight. There's usually 2 generators back there, and a couple of pretty safe pallets in the back section as well. On the sides, there's randomly generated loops, which are, all your common tiles, depending on what spawns. On the front side of the actual Father Cambell's Chapel, there's a guaranteed shack spawn, and the basement can either spawn there, obviously, or in the main building of the chapel. It's a decently sized map. It's not hard to find generators. You're always relatively close, especially it's very easy for survivors to 3-gen themselves onto, especially if they're not taking care of the carnival or splitting their pressure equally. So that's always a plus to have. But I enjoy the map. It's fun to play. At the carnival, there's an actual carriage where like the clown's carriage is. That could be a little annoying because they are able to catch a fast fall by running through it. So not the biggest of deals, but generally the carnival section is pretty unsafe. And the main building is relatively easy as well, depending on what windows are open and which ones are not. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put Father Cambell's Chapel in good. I think it's a good map. It's pretty balanced, and it's not that big. Got a lot of upside to it. I enjoyed the map. Okay, now we're going to be talking about the newest map to come into Dead by Daylight, Eyrie of Crows. This came out with the Portrait of a Murder chapter featuring the artists, which of course everyone loves now. You may not see a whole lot of artists, players that are out there, but I do get this map fairly often. Eyrie of Crows. The map is a pretty big square. The main building is this massive structure that has a whole bunch of like floating books and a big old dead tree in the middle. Don't get me wrong, visually this map is stunning. It looks fantastic. On the PTB, they didn't have like all this like haze and stuff like that, but on release, the map looks like a sandstorm in Tatooine, which makes seeing things relatively difficult, especially things that are at distance. The main building itself has 2 windows. One of them has a door that's already open, and one has a breakable wall. I highly recommend breaking the breakable wall because survivors can hit the window and go all the way around and kind of just keep hitting that over and over and over again. The inside has a really interesting structure. There's 2 stairwells on opposite side of the main room that has a balcony that goes across the outside, and it connects in the middle through the tree. There is a pallet upstairs that is a god pallet that at the top of the staircase that you have to break to keep going forward, and there's also a god pallet on the outside of the balcony that you have to break to keep going forward. There's no other way to get there. I guess the one plus side to that is there's no vaults on the very top balcony, so it means survivors can't go and jump 60 feet off and land on the ground. There's no vaulting there. But aside from that, the inside of the map looks fantastic, but the main building can be a little tricky to deal with, especially if you have a survivor that's good at running. Both windows on the bottom floor that exit the main building, there's always 2 structures that spawn. Usually a TL wall or a jungle gym of some sort will spawn on those sides. Backyard behind the main structure has 2 generator spawns in the corners of each corner. And there is rocks with pallets that are there that survivors could use to, to tie and tether all that together. The sides have those structures we had mentioned earlier outside of the windows. The backside by the shack has these really weird rock formations that are kind of like carved out pathways that survivors can take. Usually the generators are sitting behind those, so there's a lot of line of sight blockers in this map. Map's definitely not small, but with the main building being so big and then all the other structures on the sides, it's very difficult to see visually what's going on. That mixed with all the haze from all the sand and stuff like that. Hands down, it is the worst trapper map in the game, in my opinion. There's no tall grass. There's no real place to set up traps other than windows. There's no sneak appeal to it, I guess you could say, when it comes to trapper stuff. High mobility killers like Oni and Billy are a lot of fun because you can kind of just zoom around the outskirts of the map, which is fun. Huntress does okay there as well, too, for me. But the map's just decent. Visually great. It's okay. It's hard to see things. It's hard to see things in the map. So I'm going to go ahead and put Eyrie in decent. Okay, now let's talk about the Yamaoka realm, which is going to be our first map, is Family Residence. This map was released when the Spirit came out. The main building has a generator that always spawns on the inside and a shack on the opposite side of the map. Now the main building has a couple of tricky windows that are inside, but generally the chases are fairly easy as you're able to kind of go and just walk through the doorway to get into the other room. There's a couple of breakable walls as well. There's a little patch of land in the backside of the main house that has nothing back there really other than like a Z-wall. The sides of the map have typical common loops that spawn there with your general run-of-the-mill pallets and stuff like that. The middle section is interesting because there's a lot of rock formations that have some pallets in them, and there's a lot of bamboo and there's a lot of trees. Sometimes there's hill spawns as well too. There could be a hill spawn sort of in the middle, which kind of blocks off a lot of the stuff. There's really interesting like platforms that spawn on the sides where there's lockers and a little vault in there as well. But what I would say the downside to this map is a lot of the props are spawned relatively close to each other, so it's fairly easy for survivors, like I've said, to kind of string those together. But ultimately, once the pallets are gone, a lot of those loops lose a lot of their strength. The main building isn't anything spectacular. There's no pallet in it. It can spawn in the basement, which is pretty cool. Being that the map's a little on the dark side and there's a lot of vegetation, it's fairly easy for some survivors to kind of hide in some of the trees and bamboo and bushes and stuff like that. But ultimately, it's a pretty decent map. It's hard to see from one end to the other and see kind of what's going on unless you're on top of a hill. Aside from that, it's pretty good. Nothing too fancy. It's just a decent map. So I'm gonna go ahead and put Family Residence on decent. Move my camera down just a tad so we can see that. Okay, cool. Now let's talk about the last map that's a part of the Yamaoka estate realm, which came out with the Oni. It is called Sanctum of Wrath. Sanctum of Wrath used to be my all-time favorite map until Dead Dog Saloon was a thing. But the map Sanctum of Wrath is a big square with a massive temple structure in the middle. On top of the main structure, there's a generator that is there with 2 lockers. There's a few vaults on top that survivors can vault down, but it's super easy to chase as a killer because you can go down you can either cut off the main stairs. One side has a stairwell and there's 2 drop-offs, so it's super easy to chase people. The reason why I like Sanctum of Wrath so much is because there is 3 generators on one side, 1 in the middle, and 3 on the other side of the map. So it is very easy to patrol the main building and then one portion of the yard and have survivors force themselves to finish those. And then obviously kind of like Azarov's resting place, it's very easy for survivors to 3-gen themselves. It is one of my all-time favorite Huntress maps to play on because I like to literally just sit up on top and just snipe from across the map. Very similar to Family Residence, a lot of vegetation, a lot of hill spawns, rocks. Your typical structures spawn there, nothing too crazy. There is a shack that is in the corner. The map is a lot of fun. There's a really cool mechanic. I don't know if you guys knew this, some people don't. On the outskirts of the temple, there's these statues with heads on them that actually follow you when you're walking around. So when you walk around, you turn around, you see them, and then you keep walking another way. Their heads will follow you around, which is cool. The basement that spawns in the main building is on the ground floor inside the actual temple, and it goes down. It is very difficult for survivors to come out of, especially if you're in the area, because you can come down from up top or you can just patrol that area, which makes it super deadly. I'm putting Sanctum of Wrath in Great. Really, really enjoy the map. It's a lot of fun. All right. Now, let's talk about the next map, the game. The game got a visual update like a year ago, and they changed a few things. When they updated the map, they added like 24, 25 pallets that could spawn on this map. Every single pallet that spawns on the game is extremely strong. There is a lot of god pallets that you have to break in order to proceed with the chase. The map consists of 2 floors. The top floor has 3 generators, one usually in the middle section somewhere. There's a lot of side rooms as well where the other 2 generators could spawn. And there's multiple ways to get from the top floor to the bottom floor. On the main floor upstairs, there are there's 2 stairwells that go down. One of the stairwells has a really, really strong pallet that a survivor can just drop, and then they fall down, and you have to break it to chase them down there. The other stairs has a pallet laying on the side that they can loop around and drop there. And then in the back rooms, there's also stairwells to go down or up there as well. And usually, they have these really uncomfortable loops there that have a pallet resting on the railing of the stairs. So when survivors come up, they can cut left and then drop the pallet, and you're forced to break that one as well. There's also random holes in the ground where survivors can just fall down. In the corner, there's a trash chute where they go up a flight of stairs and they can vault down this big tubular structure and land at the bottom. So there's a whole bunch of different ways survivors can get to the bottom floor. One of the biggest downsides to this map shared the same problem that Hawkins National Laboratory had. There's a lot of sight blockers. The map was super congested, and there's a lot of hallways and rooms and walls that are blocking a lot of line of sight. So it made the map kind of boring, and the game suffers from that as well. The upstairs is a lot more open, so you can see kind of what's going on, but downstairs it's nothing but tight corridors, and the bottom floor is just got a lot of tight, narrow hallways, and it's just scattered and riddled with really, really, really good pallets. The basement is always a fixed spawn. It's going to spawn in the corner next to the bathroom generator that's always there as well. And that room is also surrounded by 2 really, really strong god pallets that you have to break. You cannot mind game that area. And a lot of the rooms are cut off by doors. You can either usually hit a breakable wall, or the door will actually open up once the generator is completed, kind of opening the map up a little bit more as the game progresses. I find the chases are very, very dull and boring, and if you're going up against a survivor that knows how to loop decently, and they decide they want to burn every single resource that's available, you're going to be in that chase forever. So I'm not a big fan of the game. It's boring. I don't like breaking a bajillion pallets, and it's gray and dull, and it's not easy on the eyes. It's not fun. I do not like the game at all. I'm going to put the game in awful. Don't sue me. All right. Now that we got that out of the way, let's talk about the swamp maps. First map up is going to be the Grim Pantry. The Grim Pantry has a 2-level main building. Up top is a guaranteed spawn for a generator. The basement can also spawn in the middle. Up top has 2 pallets that are generally pretty strong. The outsides of the top level one side has a really, really good vault, and the other side is just an open doorway that has a hole in the ground that takes you down to the bottom floor. Chasing up there can be a little annoying if Survivor keeps catching the fast vault over and over again, and then you gotta kind of just finally catch up to him. That's not a big deal. The bottom floor is a little congested. It's got a whole bunch of like pillars and stuff like that are like the supports of the actual structure, and there are 2 really, really good pallets that are down there as well. You can't really mind game. Survivors usually drop those. You just gotta break them and keep going. The middle section of the Grim Pantry is just a bunch of swamp vegetation with some box loops, so there's a bunch of trash and like a couple pallets there. What's really interesting is the swamp actually introduces a prop called the Pog Log, which is a big, super long log that has a vault in the middle. It's random spawn. Sometimes they spawn in the corner. Sometimes they can spawn on the sides of the map. Survivor, it's a really, really annoying tree to deal with because the Survivor can just fast vault it, and it's super duper long, and you have to go all the way around it, and they just keep hitting the wall and stuff like that. Adjacent from the main building, on the back side of the map is going to be where the shack is, and then on the left of that is a weird boardwalk type of wooden thing where sometimes 2 gens can spawn on top of that. It's got a ramp that takes you up top, and then underneath there's a couple windows, and there's a pretty good pallet in there as well. Most of the time, just like anything else, once you get rid of the pallet there, it's that structure is not too bad to deal with. Totem spawns can sometimes be okay if they spawn out in the corners of maps and survivors are checking the outskirts if you have ruin up and stuff like that. So you may get a little lower longevity because totems are a little bit more easier hidden on a map that's got a bunch of swamp, grass, vegetation, and stuff like that. And then on the other side, there's like this weird house, which is only unique to the swamp. And it has a little tight stairwell that takes you upstairs, and there's a big box and a vault, and a couple and a couple lockers and a pallet that is very strong, which you have to break. And then down below, there's also another pallet down below as well, which is a little bit easier to deal with. The map's very dark. It's not big though. It got actually reworked a while ago, where it was actually much bigger. Now it is a lot smaller. Aside from the pog log and some of the annoying main building loops and pallets that are up there, the map's just okay. It's not anything too exciting, but it's definitely not the worst map in the game. It doesn't have any real huge glaring flaws where you look at it. It's a really, really, really good trapper map. Putting traps in the swamp is chef's kiss. It is an awesome, awesome map for the trapper. But other than that, it's nothing too crazy, except for the pog log. Pog log's annoying to deal with. Map's just decent. I'm gonna have to go ahead and put Grim Pantry in decent. All right, let's move on to the last swamp map. This is the Pale Rose. The Grim Pantry and the Pale Rose share a lot of the same features. They both visually look the same. The main building on the Pale Rose is replaced with a big boat instead of that building. The boat is 2 floors. It has 2 stairwells that take you up top, and there's always a guaranteed generator spawn on the top of the boat. Sometimes on the side or the back of the boat, there is a god pallet that is there that you have to break, as you can't really mind game it because survivors can see you through the inside of the boat through the windows that are there. The middle section of the boat, there is a hole in the ground that's really easy to drop down as the killer and cut survivors off that are coming down the flights of stairs and stuff like that. In the bottom portion of the boat, can either spawn the basement, and it always spawns a pallet next to some barrels and boxes that are back there which is not as strong as the one that is up top. The shack is in the same spot, and then on the left side, they have a little tugboat that is there that always has a generator inside it. It's very congested, it's small. There's a vault on the back side. It's very easy for you and survivors to get stuck on the edges of the boat and things that protrude out on the side of the prop. And then the boardwalk that is similar to the Grim Pantry is now on the right-hand side, tilted in a different angle, and there's 2 generators back there. Nothing too crazy. The map's kind of like in an L shape, and aside from just a bunch of swamp vegetation and rocks and stuff like that, there's nothing too crazy. The pog log exists there as well. Same thing with totems. They have okay spawns there. I would say the Pale Rose is a lot easier to deal with main building-wise than the Grim Pantry. But aside from that, there's nothing too spectacular that I care about in the map, to be honest. It's just kind of is what it is. Play the map. It's not a big deal. I'm going to go ahead and put, just like Grim Pantry, I'm going to put the Pale Rose in decent. All right. That concludes the Shrek maps. All right, moving on to the Macmillan Estate realm. First map up is going to be Coal Tower. Coal Tower is a fantastic map. I think it's one of the most balanced maps in the entire game. The main building is a tower that has 2 levels. There's a stairwell going up. There's a breakable wall. There's 2 breakable walls on the inside of the first floor and 3 breakable walls up top. Up top on the coal tower, there's always a generator spawn. The basement can also spawn at the bottom of the coal tower. The first floor of the main building has a window that survivors can catch a fast fault and go out through, which isn't a big deal. But upstairs is really interesting because there's 3 breakable doors that you can break, or you can keep closed with always 1 exit that survivors can jump out of. Separating the map is a big concrete thing that's in the middle that is always there that you have to always go around, which kind of, it's really the only big line of sight blocker that's there. The generators are very easy to find. Like I said, 1 in the main building, usually 1 to each side of the coal tower, 1 in the middle, and then 3 in the backside where the shack is. There's no real crazy structure. Sometimes the tiles are a little close-knit, so sometimes you can have survivors that can tie all those together. But other than that, the map is just a good map. There's nothing that pulls to either side that it's stronger than the other. It's just a really good balanced map, and it's one of my all-time favorites. Coal Tower is going to be in the great tier for me. Up next is Sheltered Woods. Sheltered Woods is kind of like the Rotten Fields of Macmillan Estate maps, because it's a relatively pretty big size map. There's a massive dead tree in the middle, There's always a static shack spawn where there's always a basement. But the middle is kind of just like a relatively big dead zone. There's a couple of rocks that have pallets in them and a couple of generators scattered in the middle section. But other than that, there ain't nothing going on in the middle section of that map. There's a lot of dead zones in the very, very back as well, too. With only, to be honest, only a couple of, I believe there's maybe like 5 or 6 actual loop props that'll spawn on this map. All of them are going to be on the outskirts of the map as well, kind of similar to Rotten Fields. And the map, and depending on what spawns, it's usually a one and done tile. Then the survivor has to cross a fair amount of ground to get to the next structure. It's a really, really fun map for me because I enjoy playing Hillbilly on it, Huntress on it. It's very wide and open, which is nice, and there's a lot of dead zones. Other than some, like I said, other than some tedious rock loops that have pallets in them, there's nothing else that survivors really, really can use unless they're on the outskirts of the map. The only downside I would say is it is relatively big. It's a pretty big map. I'm not sure the exact size, but I think it's in comparison to Rotten Fields. But the map is fun. There's not a whole lot of super, super overwhelmingly strong things that are there, aside from, the shack, or, if you get a good survivor that's, can loot pretty well. But other than that, a lot of dead zones, a lot of open field, which is good for me. And yeah, I'm a fan. I'm gonna put Shelter Woods in good. I think that's a good spot for that map. On to the third Macmillan Estate map is going to be Ironworks of Misery. Ironworks is an interesting map because it's a little on the big side, and the main building is huge. The main building has a generator that'll always spawn on the inside, and it also has a stairwell going in and also a stairwell on the outside that leads to this big catwalk that's up top. It's very, very big. Survivors tend to go all the way up there. There is a window that's on the inside that puts them back outside to the outside balcony or the catwalk out there. And there's a breakable wall that you should break to make your chasing a lot easier for you up there. This map, back in the day, this is way before my time, but I've only heard horror stories about it, that there was a god window that was literally an infinite, that on the base level of the map, survivors could just fast vault it over and over and over, and it would take you forever, if at all, to catch them. But that's long been changed. Now there's that window is there, but there's also an opening of a doorway that you can get there. The basement has a chance to spawn inside the actual main building, which is very congested. It's a very narrow way to get in and out, which is pretty cool. But aside from that, the outside shares very similar Macmillan props, but the map is relatively on the big side. Chasing survivors through the main building, and especially if they go up towards the top, can be a little tedious. And there's props around the entire main buildings. There's props, there's tiles that spawn in the back, on the sides, and also on the back side where the shack is. Overall, main building can be a little tedious to deal with. Its size, it's one of those maps where you have to make sure you are trying to maintain pressure appropriately so you don't get yourself in a really, really bad gen split situation where you have to traverse from one side of the map to the other on the last and final generators. The map is just overall just decent. It's never anything that's like, oh man, I don't really want to play this map, but it's nothing that's like, it's nothing that gets me excited to play it. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put Ironworks of Misery in decent. I think it's actually going to go ahead and put us in the decent tier is getting a little fat, a little thick. All right, let's go to the next one. Moving on to Suffocation Pit. Suffocation Pit actually has a really interesting map layout. On one side, you have a building that is the entrance to the coal mine. And when survivors go in there, there's a couple of windows that they can choose to vault through. Some are a little bit stronger than others. But on the side with the building, there's no actual structures there. Meaning there's no commonly spawned tiles there. So you will have no TL walls, no jungle gyms, nothing like that. It's literally that building with a couple of decent pallets surrounding it, and then generator. And then once you move towards the middle of the map, then that's where there's a massive influx of tiles. So the middle portion of the map generally spawns a lot of long wall, short wall jungle gyms into a TL wall, and they're all scattered in the middle. So if you're going up against a good opponent that knows how to loot pretty well, they're going to have a field day in that middle section. Now, the other section where the shack is, very similar to where the main building is, there's just a couple of trash loops and usually like a big log and a big stack of logs and stuff like that, and then the rest of the generators are there. Similar to maps like Sanctum of Wrath or Azarov's Resting Place, if you are pressuring one side pretty well, chances are survivors are going to put themselves in a bad situation based on their gen placement because they're going to focus on what's available and not being patrolled by you. So it's very easy to set yourself up for a nice juicy 3-gen, especially if you're playing Trapper, which is a lot of fun there. But on the flip side of that, it is very easy to get split because the map is relatively big. So having one generator off on one side and then you have two on the other side, it makes traversing very, very difficult, especially because the whole middle section is Looptown, USA for survivors. On the corners of the map, there's usually like trash pallets. Once those pallets are gone, it is an absolute dead zone, which makes your job a lot easier. So as long as you can eliminate all the pallets in the middle section of the map, you're going to be a-okay as far as those tiles are concerned. But there is a good chance, and it is very common to have TL walls spawn to TL wall, spawn to a long wall jungle gym, and survivors just boop, 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 boop all day long. The map is good. It's a good map, and I enjoy it. I enjoy it, especially if you can apply pressure the right way. Then you're gonna have an okay time. You'll be fine. I'm gonna put Suffocation Pit in. I'm gonna put Suffocation Pit in decent. Solely because the main building can be a little annoying, especially with the surrounding pallets in the middle section can be a nightmare depending on who you're playing against. But I think it's not a bad map. It's just decent. So we'll keep Suffocation Pit there. Okie dokie. Our last map of the Macmillan Estate realm is going to be the Groaning Storehouse. The Groaning Storehouse has a main building, which is the storehouse, that has a pretty powerful window and a breakable wall right next to it. There's always a generator that spawns there, and the basement can also spawn inside that building as well. Very similar to Disturbed Ward, there are two pocket alleys, and we kind of went over that earlier in the video, where there's a map, and then there's two alleys that go down the sides, and they have generators that spawn back there. The same problem occurs just like in Disturbed Ward, where if you're not pressuring your gens the right way, you could have generators that are still left to be repaired back there in the end game, in the late game, which is very, very difficult to do. Those alleyways suck up a lot of your time. Personally, when I'm playing on this map, I hope to God, I don't even pressure those backsides and hoping that they'll just do those generators. So it forces them to finish the easy gens so that they're closing their play area so it's easier for me to patrol in the late game. Generator spawns on this map are also fairly easy as well too. It's all kind of in just different quadrants. You know there's going to be one in the middle. You know there's always going to be one a piece in the alleyways, and usually a couple scattered on the outskirts of the main building. Other than that, the map is not anywhere flashy. I don't think it's as bad as Disturbed Ward, and I don't think it's as big. But the map's just going to be decent. I'm going to go ahead and throw Groaning Storehouse in the decent tier. I don't think it's awful. If the main building was as hard as Disturbed Ward, then it'd probably be in the awful tier. But other than that, that's where I think it should go. Okay. I think we all know where this next map is going to go. But let's keep this as short and sweet as possible. Haddonfield, Lambkin Lane. I personally do think that Badham Preschool, All Variations, and Fractured Cowshed are worse than Haddonfield. But Haddonfield still sucks pretty hard. Recently, Dead by Daylight has changed a couple of things to the Myers house. You used to be able to go to the second floor of the Myers house and have vaults to get you on the back awning and then also the front awning of the building. They patched up the windows in the front side of the house, so you're not able to do that. They also had a super, super strong window on the outside, right next to the basement on the first floor of the Myers house, which has now been boarded up. Thank God, because if that window opened, it was awful to deal with. Survivors can go and just loop nonstop over and over again. With those corrections, it has been fixed, but there's still a lot of problems with Haddonfield. One, the map is just not fun to play. I don't really know anyone that actually enjoys that map as killer. Haddonfield has a House of Pain that always guarantees a spawn. There are no typical common loops or tiles that spawn on this map. Everything is unique to this realm. So it's all houses and fence lines. And my biggest pet peeve on Haddonfield is, I know it's not as bad as it used to be, is the long fences that you can't, if a survivor crouches under, you can't hit. And also the concrete bushes. There's bushes that are like completely solid that you cannot phase through at all. It's just overall just dealing with having to enter homes, going up flights of stairs, or having a survivor to vault out of. Most of the pallets on Haddonfield are relatively unsafe, to be honest. In the street, there's usually pallets that are laying next to cars, which are really, really easy to deal with. In between some of the homes and the backyards by the fence line, there are pallets that survivors can drop that you can easily just kind of mind game around that side, which is super easy. But there are pallets in the driveways on cars that you have to break. The car is just too long for you to go around, or sometimes the pallets are inside the garage. But ultimately, the map just sucks. The map's just not fun. I've heard things that Haddonfield's going to get a rework, hopefully eventually. There are no breakable walls, so that's always a plus. But other than that, the map is just not fun. Everything is, the entire map is a massive line of sight blocker. You physically have to go into all of the homes to visually check to see if there's a survivor working on a gen. And just not fun. It's just not a fun map. So Haddonfield easily, as you probably predicted, is going into the awful tier until they fix it. I don't know how they'll do it. Maybe they'll have breakable houses where you can just kick an entire house over. That'd be kind of cool. Okay, it seems that we are now getting into a lot of the one-off maps. Up next is going to be the Treatment Theater, or also called Larry's. This map is actually a map I really enjoy. I play a lot of stealth killers. I do like Ghostface a lot. If you can probably tell by my channel, I like Michael Myers. The Pig's a fun time as well. I think those killers do exceptionally well on Larry's. The map is not that big. It's on the smaller side, which is good. Smaller maps is obviously better for killers, right? I know my way around Treatment Theater pretty well. I think I enjoy every single killer on this map, excluding probably Hillbilly, because one, my chainsaw is not the best, and two, there is a lot of stuff to get snagged on and stuff like that. In the main room, there's going to be a generator that's always spawns there, and then you have gens that are just spread out throughout the map. Some are in rooms, some are in the main hallways on the outskirts of the map. There are a couple of decent pallets, and there's a couple really, really, really good pallets. Right by the library, there's a god pallet there that you have to break, and also there's, on the outskirts of one of the hallways, there is a god pallet that you have to break because it literally cuts off the entire hallway. You have to break those. Some of the rooms on the inside can be a little difficult, especially the long room that usually has a generator in it with a bunch of beds, and there's a pallet that drops there. That's also an annoying one to deal with. But aside from that, I think the map is pretty good. I personally enjoy it, excluding, obviously Hillbilly, like I mentioned, but the map's fun. I like it a lot, especially when I play my stealth killers and I send myself to Larry's. I have a really good time every single time I play on it, which is cool. This map, just like Haddonfield, does not have any common loops or tiles that get spawned here. It's all just windows and pallets, and that's pretty much it, and long corridors. If the basement spawns in the main room, it's actually really, really, really easy to patrol that, as that room is such a high traffic area. It's very easy to catch survivors going in for a save or coming out from the basement and stuff like that. I'm going to put Larry's in good. I enjoy the map personally. I like it a lot. Really good on stealth killers. Sucks for Billy. All right, moving on to one of the newer maps in Dead by Daylight is going to be Midwich, which came from the Silent Hill DLC. Midwich technically is the smallest map in the game. I know it does have 2 floors. However, by scale, it is actually the smallest. We were just talking about Treatment Theater and how small maps is good. It is true. I have a problem with Midwich, however. It is small, but Midwich is boring. Personally, I know that some of you guys may not agree, and Midwich technically has the highest kill rate in Dead by Daylight for killers. That is all good and dandy. However, the chases in that map are boring. It's a lot of holding W. If you get survivors that play super immersed, you're literally just going in a big square over and over, second floor and first floor. There's a couple of jungle gyms that spawn in the middle courtyard of the school, but the outskirts of the map are actually all just classrooms and stuff, and they have usually a pallet almost in every single room. that are usually easy to deal with. There's one area where there's 2 classrooms that are joined together by one window, and you have to break the door in order to catch up with the survivor, because vaulting that window back and forth is something that will just kill too much of your time. The cool thing is both exit gates are fixed on Midwich Elementary School, which means they don't switch. I know we really haven't talked about exit gates at all because they are random spawns majority of the time, but on Midwich they are both fixed on opposite sides of the courtyard, which makes patrolling that in the end game super duper easy. The hatch will only spawn on the bottom floor, or sometimes it'll spawn on the landing of the first flight of stairs. There are 2 stairwells in the opposite sides of the map that get you to the next floor, and there's also a little secret tunnel that you have to break 2 doors to get through. That's all fine. As far as the chase mechanics on Midwich, very easy. That's why it's got the highest kill rate. But for me personally, the map is just boring. You turn a corner, you see survivors at the end of the hallway. It's just a holding W simulator to catch up to them, and then finally start your chase. But the good news is, on the upside to that, is there really is not a whole lot of looping longevity for survivors, as there's not a lot of structures and tiles to really string along the majority of the time. But for me personally, being this is my personal killer tier list, I think the map is boring to play on. I'm gonna put it in decent. That's my biggest complaint. It's just boring. We are getting close to the end of this video. And by the way, if you are new to the channel and you're still staying along with me, don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you're not subscribed already. It tremendously helps me out as we're trying to get to our goal of 200,000 subs, which is crazy. All right, moving on. There are 2 maps we're about to talk about that are from the Red Forest realm. One of them, the first one that we're going to talk about, is Mother's Dwelling. I tried to look this up because I wasn't sure, but before Raccoon City Police Department came out, or RPD, Mother's Dwelling was the biggest map in Dead by Daylight. I still think that it is. Mother's Dwelling has literally nothing good going for it, period. The map is way too big, which is really interesting because this is actually the lore-based map for the Huntress, and she's slow as shit, so I don't understand why they'd give her such a big map. The main building is a big cabin-like structure that has a generator that spawns on the out balcony. It has a bunch of random windows that spawn upstairs and on the bottom. There are no pallets on the inside, but there are pallets. There's 2 really, really good pallets on the outside of the main building. The basement doesn't have a chance to spawn in there, but it is massive. Map is so big, you have the main building, and then you have the other 6 generators just scattered on the outskirts of the map. What's really interesting about the Red Forest realm is they have these really unique tiles that can spawn that I'm almost positive are unique to just the Red Forest, and they are ugly to deal with. They're these log weird things where there's like 3 alleyways, and there's one with like a bunch of lockers in it, and there's a pallet, and then there's a window on one side. There's also a shack that spawns in the corner. It's just, as a killer, unless you're playing like Freddy Krueger who can teleport, or someone that's really high mobility like Oni or Blight or Hillbilly, traversing that map sucks. It is bad. You have to create your own momentum somehow to not get left in the dust by survivors. Meaning, if you can go ahead and get an early couple of downs and start snowballing in that fashion, that's the only way that you're going to have a good time on this map. Aside from that, the map's just way too big. Simple. You can't be at multiple places at one time. It's hard to patrol. If you get into a lengthy chase and survivors are able to tie some structures together, you're going to lose gens. They're going to fly like no problem. Mother's Dwelling, until it gets a rework, I don't know how they're going to do it, other than chopping it literally in half, maybe, then it's going to be doable for the time being. Mother's Dwelling is going right into the awful tier next to these other lovely maps. Okay, now that that is out of the way, let's talk about the Temple of Purgation. The Temple of Purgation is the Plagues map, which is really interesting as to why this and Mother's Dwelling share the Red Forest realm. Anyways, it doesn't matter, but this map is a little bit different. It's not as big as Mother's Dwelling. It has a massive temple structure in the middle that always has a generator that spawns on the bottom section of the building. For you to go inside, there's 2 staircases that go down and lead you to the generator. And then there's also a whole bunch of like tunnels and catacomb stuff underneath that pose literally no value for you to go down there. Unless you're chasing the literal last survivor there, right? Aside from that, There are generators. There's a shack that is not too far from the main building, and then there's a bunch of randomly spawned structures throughout the map. The main building is pretty easy to traverse. Once the generator in the main building is completed, it actually opens up doorways that were previously closed, which makes traversing that area as killer and chasing survivors much easier. And there's a couple of windows that survivors can fast fall out of, but there's usually like another drop off that you could just follow very close behind. Generators, there are some ugly tiles that spawn here that you have to deal with that are unique for the Red Forest. Same thing as always, once you eliminate the pallet, the structure usually loses a lot of its strength, but it's not nearly as bad as Mother's Dwelling. The front yard of the temple has a chance to spawn these really weird walls with pallets that are in them that are a little frustrating to deal with, but something you just got to take care of as a killer. Overall, the map's not bad though. I personally don't mind it. If I get Temple of Purgation, it's just one of those things where it's okay. I feel that majority of the time, I personally do okay on that map as opposed to some of the others. So for me, I'm gonna keep this nice and sweet and short. Temple of Purgation is gonna go in the decent tier for me. It's not awful. It's not good. It's just something that's just kind of like meh. Okay. Down to the final two maps. All right, let's talk about Mount Ormand Resort. Mount Ormand Resort used to be really, really bad. The map got reworked a while ago, but it was really, really, really bad before. The map was just ugly, and the tiles there were just bad. It was just tough to deal with. It was a tough map. However, it's since been reworked. Mount Ormand is relatively on the bigger side, I guess you could say. It's a little bit bigger than average, and it's a big square with a massive lodge in the middle. The lodge has a fixed generator that always spawns in the middle, and then there's a stairwell that takes you up, and it splits between two different directions. By going up the stairs and to the left, it takes you to the outside awning or balcony outside, where there's a god pallet that is up there. And then on the right side, it takes you to an assortment of rooms where survivors can fast fall down and get back to the main floor. And then the very end of the inside of the awning, and the inside of the second floor, there's another god pallet up top where survivors can drop, and then you have to break that to catch them. Outside of the main building, there is a Zamboni big snowplow vehicle outside that has a pallet in it that's in between a rock, so that's another nice pallet that you have to break to get out of the way. Generally speaking, there's a generator in the middle, a few in the front, in the back, and then usually sometimes one on the side. There is a shack that is a fixed location. It'll always spawn in the one of the corners of the maps. And the Ormand tiles are a little unique. They have a couple of different jungle gyms that are there that could be a little annoying to deal with. Biggest complaint I probably have with Mount Ormand Resort is, for some reason, their totem spawns suck. That map is so bad for totems. Outside of the main lodge, there's like this rock formation that's by a big sign. It always seems there's a totem spawn there. It always seems that all your valuable hex totem spawns are always right there, so it's right in plain view. Aside from that, the map is not too bad. We can still, and I do still get juiced on this map from time to time. But it's one of those things where once the really important valuable pallets are gone out of the main building, 'cause that seems to be the focal point where all survivors kind of like to run towards. Then it's kind of a breeze. It's not too bad. There's not really a whole lot for survivors to do there. Patrolling the generators on the outskirts and the corners of the maps can be a little difficult, especially, and just like we've been talking tonight, especially if you try to figure out what type of quadrants you're going to be watching over on your patrol and things don't get out of hand, you'll be okay. Mount Ormand Resort, I'm just going to go in the decent tier. Doesn't do anything exciting for me. It's not too bad. It's not too bad, but it's not great. But there it is. All right, my friends, we have made it to the last and final map in the tier list for today's video, Raccoon City Police Department, otherwise known as RPD. Let me get one thing out of the way before I tear this map to shreds. I am very thankful for what Resident Evil has done to Dead by Daylight. It brought in a massive influx of new players. It boosted the game up, and we got a lot more people to come join us in the fog, which is cool. So, with that out of the way, RPD. Imagine like we talked about Mother's Dwelling. What if we took a bunch of mother's dwellings and stacked them on top of each other. I understand that behavior had to make RPD to scale, because if you don't want to be advertising that you have Resident Evil coming to the game and then have a whole bunch of diehard Resident Evil fans come in there and play RPD and go, wait, this is not what I'm used to. It's not what I played before. So I understand that. The map is huge. It has 2 levels with technically a 3rd level in the library. The main hall is got this massive staircase with a generator that usually spawns in the middle somewhere. And then you have a lot of narrow hallways and tight corridors and rooms that are very disorienting to try to navigate your way through. There's an outside that has a smashed helicopter with a generator that spawns up there where survivors have a decent pallet and they can fast vault down the side of the building. There's also another vault on the other side. Let's talk about the library for 1 second. The library in RPD is this massive room that has this huge staircase that goes up to the very tippy top of all the bookshelves and stuff like that. There's no generator. There's nothing. There's just vaults. That's it. So a survivor can take the killer all the way to the top, vault it, and come all the way back down and vault it over and over and over again. If you're ever playing RPD, survivor takes you to the library. Unless it's the last survivor, leave. Don't take the chase. It's almost never worth your time. Biggest complaint that I have with RPD, however, is me wanting to get to a point of interest and not being able to get there in a timely fashion. That's the biggest problem. I can literally hear a survivor above me working on a generator or going for a save, and I have to alter my course and go through a stairwell and down a hallway, and by the time I finally get there, the survivor's already gone. That's my biggest complaint. Another thing I dislike about RPD is hatch typically and has always generally spawned on the base floor of all maps. That is not the case with RPD. The hatch can spawn literally anywhere, on any floor, which is insane. Being that we're in the year of boons, boon totems, for instance, like Circle of Healing, once it is applied, it goes and the effects of Circle of Healing for 24 meters goes through all floors. So you can hear a boon somewhere, but you have no way to get to it because you don't know where the hell it's at. I think they did a fantastic job with bringing that map from a big game like Resident Evil over to Dead by Daylight to scale. I understand the reasons to why they did it. I don't enjoy playing on the map in the slightest. The gens are split pretty evenly, usually 3 on one side, 3 on the other, with 1 in the middle, I think that's generally how it goes, but it is an absolute maze. And the map's been out for a long time, and I still get lost to this day on that map trying to chase somebody. There's a couple of god pallets in the hallways that you have to break that survivors can just drop, and there's nothing you can do about it because it cuts off the entire hallway. The exit gates, there's an exit gate that spawns in the front of the RPD, which is always there, but there's also another one that is a rotating spawn. It'll either spawn in the backside, depending on where it is. And even if it spawns on one side that you're not familiar with, you have to literally go upstairs and go down this corridor. It's just crazy. RPD for me, I would love to end on a positive note with this tier list, but RPD is going to go in the awful tier for me. As much as I dislike Badham Preschool, I wish that maybe they took the approach of doing a couple different variations of RPD where some of the hallways, some of the rooms are actually boarded off, and using RNG as a way to see, hey, this section's going to be closed off, which will compress the map a little bit more, make it a little bit more make it a little more fun to play on. But I know there's some people that are diehard Resident Evil fans and some people that just genuinely like RPD. I'm not one of them. And RPD, unfortunately, is going to be met in the awful tier. Alrighty, everybody. This is my tier list. This is probably one of the longest videos I think I've made yet. And if you've stuck around through the entire thing, thank you very, very much. I do appreciate that tremendously. But yeah, so we broke everything down from great, good, decent, and awful as far as maps that I personally enjoy versus dislike playing as killer. Keep in mind, guys, your list is going to vary tremendously from mine, or maybe it's the same. We never know. But the whole idea is my opinion and, having fun with it and being honest about maps I enjoy and which ones I don't. But I'm going to end it here. I appreciate you all for tuning in. Remember, come check me out on Twitch. I stream every Saturday through Tuesday, starting at 4 p.m. PT till about 10 o'clock. And we'll love for you to come swing by and let me know you're from YouTube. Come say hi and have some fun with us. I hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day, and I'll catch you on the next one.